As we enter these gates, we are entering our early years garden here at Calthorpe Community Garden. The early years garden is targeted towards under fives. However, there's not a strict entrance policy there. We don't make children leave just because they're 6 or 7. However, the garden has been designed targeting early years children under 5. I'd just like to start by saying that this area is still in development. However, a year ago, in fact less than that, more within the last 9 months, we've developed everything you see here, because when we first started developing this garden, there was only 2 playhouses, a swing, and then the whole garden was just grass, and very poor grass at that. So everything I'm about to show you has been created by myself and volunteers over the last 9 months. What we are most proud of is that we've achieved everything you see here without any budget. There wasn't any money to do this redevelopment. All of the plants, all of the infrastructure that we've introduced into this area has been achieved by very kind donations, or by resourcing other plants from other parts of the garden. Okay, so the main key areas here is, as you enter the gate here, this is children's food growing. It is just in containers at the moment. However, the plan is to give them 2 small in-ground allotments here. And the food growing will be led by our early years manager. However, the children will be allowed to get as involved as they like. And we won't actually treat it as an area where we expect to crop from much. Unfortunately, but expectedly, in a garden like this, plants will inevitably get damaged in our early years garden. Okay, as we walk past the food growing area here, we have created this wood chip path here to make the access to the indoor play space more accessible in the winter months. We specifically created this path out of wood chip. Wood chip hosts a wider variety of wildlife than lawn, than most other organic materials. As this material is broken down underfoot and through natural weathering of rain, it will start to decompose, at which point it will be lifted up and incorporated into the flower beds as a mulch and replaced with fresh wood chips. So it becomes cyclical and a part of our horticultural operations here. Okay, we have this flower bed here, which is more of an ornamental flower bed for the children's garden. We haven't had much perennial planting to establish here. Perennial planting as in long-term plants that will return year after year. Last year, we basically had to plant this out of very short-lived plants called annuals that will only live for 1 year. However, they are very cheap to come by and very easy to propagate from. However, we will be hoping to seek funding to establish more permanent planting in this area. I've held off planting it so far this year just because we are still getting some cold overnight temperatures. However, within the next week or 2, I've got lots and lots again of annuals to put in this area. We're going to really make a bit of a display of sunflowers in this area for this year. So this is more ornamental. This area is more ideally look and appreciate, but please don't touch, which is of course very optimistic for a children's garden. However, this area behind me, which was once just a hill of weeds, is where we would like children to get up close and personal with the plants. All of the plants here were donated to us from Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, and they put on a production of Brigadoon last year in 2025. And so the plants in this area were selected to represent the Scottish Highlands, and then they donated them to us very kindly. Because we are still in the spring, a lot of the plants in this area, if they have broken dormancy, are still very small. A lot of the plants here are ornamental grasses. So by the end of the summer, as they grow up again, there will be lots of height and structure and movement to this area. A lot of the very tall grasses we planted close to the logs that we staggered through this area. And as those grasses grow up, these logs will become more and more obscured, and children will actually have to push past the grasses and find their way through this area eventually. We've maintained an area of open lawn through the middle. We've started to stage containers around the playhouses, which we're going to fill with more shade-tolerant architectural plants. For example, bamboos and bananas have already gone into that planter there. Around the back of these playhouses, there's a large built-in border back here that is in almost full shade. And we had lots of discussion about what we were going to do with this area. In the end, we decided to create what we're calling our fairy garden. And we want to create a miniature landscape and use plants and ornamentation to play with scale, and as they make it look like a miniature landscape. And so a lot of the key plants have been put in, but they will actually need to grow up a bit more before it starts to look like what we imagine. And I imagine actually this area will take several years of development, and I keep adding more and more each year before it quite looks like what we had in mind. But this first area we're calling the jungle zone. So we've selected lots of architectural, interesting and exotic looking foliages here, which will grow up and create a dense jungle-like canopy. Through the area there are several different styles of fairy houses scattered around. There's also different metal fairies. This one here has just had a bit of a falling over. If I just stand her up again, there's lots of different metal fairies that are all themed around different flowers, and we let the children play with them and move them around and rehome them, and children will come in and try and find their particular favourite fairy and where has it moved to now. We've incorporated a large wildlife area into the back here using lots of rotting wood, which becomes conversational and educational for the younger children as the values of rotting wood. Our motto we use is rotting wood does good. As we move around this section here, we're calling it the fairy wetland area. Originally we wanted to create a river, like a lined pond, to imitate a river through this area. And we created the river, we lined it using a recycled liner. Within a week, unfortunately, the children had punctured it. So we took the liner out, we started again. In the end, we ended up creating 4 much smaller ponds using recycled buckets and larger play containers with much more robust plastics. So that should we lose one of the ponds, we only have to deal with one small area, rather than the entire area having to be replaced at once. Each of the ponds have been filled with large rocks, so there is actually no depth to the water anywhere, which obviously makes it much safer for the children. We've got one pond in there, we've got one pond in here, we've got the smallest of the ponds in here, and then there's another 4th one back here. They all have native oxygenators, hornworts and equisetums. There is a bit of a challenge about keeping them in the pond, but we are persistent and we just keep putting them back. As we move past the wetland area, we move into what we were calling the enchanted forest, which has been made of dwarfed conifers, which will fill out, get bigger than they currently are and more bushier, but they will stay a dwarf size, so they will always be small and manageable. And the idea is, as this starts to look more and more foresty, that we will start to introduce gnomes into the area. And the gnomes live in the enchanted forest, the fairies live in fairyland, and we will talking about creating some kind of a storyboard back here which tells the story of the gnomes and the fairies sharing space and being very different but being able to live together in harmony and share resources. We will also be installing a storage shed into this little nook here to store the bikes and trikes that the children love to use in this area. We've also got large planters like these here, which have been planted out using all plants that we have propagated ourselves. And we've also got the hawthorn hedge at the back of the children's area. You can also see different bird boxes hanging up throughout the area, but hawthorn as a hedging plant is highly beneficial as it is a native, it is a flower, it is highly attractive to bees and moth actually. However, it is thorny, so because we're encouraging children to play through this area, we've raised the canopy of the hawthorn hedge, and so it will start to thicken out more towards the top, but I'm gonna have to keep raising the canopy near where we want the children to play. However, in areas like here, in areas towards like the back of the fairy garden there, I don't need to raise the canopy as much because children aren't actively encouraged anyway to play up on those areas. So as I said earlier, this area is still in development and we still do have lots to do here. I don't suppose this area will ever be fully finished. Because of the cyclical nature of the plants and the equipment in this area, we have to expect a degree of loss. We have to expect a degree of plants being broken and trampled on. However, as I said at the beginning, considering we created all of this with no budget whatsoever, we are very happy of what we've achieved so far, and it will only get better and better each year. And as we start to add more and more detail, it's going to start to feel more and more special and memorable for the younger people. Thank you.